Beneath the mines of Mandalore, in waters no Mandalorian had reached in a generation, a single eye opened. It belonged to a creature that, by every official record, was believed extinct. That creature was the Mythosaur. In the upcoming theatrical film, The Mandalorian and Grogu, it stands as the single most important creature in the story. Not for what it does on screen, but for what it represents about an entire people clawing their way back from the edge. On the desert world of Arvala 7, an Ugnaught moisture farmer named Kuiil tried to convince a Mandalorian bounty hunter to ride a blurg, a stubborn two-legged pack beast. The Mandalorian, Din Djarin, refused. Kuiil pushed back with a single line that would echo across years of Star Wars storytelling. He told Din that he was a Mandalorian, that his ancestors had ridden the great Mythosaur, and that surely he could handle this young foal. The line landed in the very first episode of Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian. Almost no one noticed, but the skull on Boba Fett's shoulder had been there since the original trilogy. For decades, Star Wars never told anyone what it was. The yellow sigil painted on the bounty hunter's pauldron in The Empire Strikes Back sat in the corner of countless frames, on toys and posters, and behind-the-scenes art without a name. Decades later, a canon reference book finally confirmed the symbol as the skull of a creature called the Mythosaur. The name simply caught up to the picture. The audience would not learn how wrong the official record was for another 4 years. Later, canon described the Mythosaur as dragon-like and immense, capable of growing more than 30 meters in length. Star Wars Bestiary Volume 1, Creatures of the Galaxy, classified the species as a sea beast, at home both on land and beneath the water. Its scaly hide ran yellow against black eyes, and 2 heavy horns curved from the sides of his mouth. For most Mandalorians, none of that mattered. Mythosaurs had vanished from the world long before any living member of the culture was born. What survived was the skull. Seasons later, Din Djarin walked into a Mandalorian forge to ask a question he had carried since the start of the show. He had broken the creed by removing his helmet, and he wanted to know how to walk in the world again. The armorer, the religious leader of his orthodox sect, did not answer with a ritual. She answered with a prophecy, and the prophecy was about a creature she did not believe was real. In the Book of Boba Fett, the armorer told Din that the songs of eons past foretold the Mythosaur rising up to herald a new age of Mandalore. Then she added, in the same breath, that it now existed only in legends. The leader of his religious order had named the most sacred symbol of her people, called it a sign of rebirth, and admitted that she did not believe it would come. The Empire's bombardment of Mandalore, after the loss of nearly her entire culture and the razing of the domed capital of Sundari, the prophecy had become a relic of a world she no longer expected to see. The despair was not in her voice, it was in the math. She had lived long enough to count what was missing. The armorer also spoke of older battles, wars between Mandalore the Great and an order of sorcerers called the Jedi. Mandalore the Great, in the current canon, was the first leader to hold the title of Mandalore, and he was the one said to have tamed the beast. The skull he wore became the sigil his descendants carried, and the foundation the entire culture stood on. By the time canon reference books recorded the prophecy, it was no longer a private admission, it was printed scripture. Star Wars Bestiary Volume 1 recorded the belief as Mandalorian doctrine rather than folklore. The book described the Mandalorian faith that Mythosaurs would one day rise up to usher in a new age for their people. What the armorer had spoken to one bounty hunter in a forge was now part of the printed record of the species itself. The prophecy said the Mythosaur would rise. A season later, in a cave beneath Mandalore, somebody saw it open its eye. In The Mandalorian's 3rd season, Din Djarin returned to the world the armorer had given up on. He came for redemption. The creed required a bath in the living waters beneath the mines of Mandalore, the only path back into the fold after he had removed his helmet. He came in full Beskar armor, the Mandalorian steel of his people, with Bo-Katan Kryze beside him as his guide. She was the princess of House Kryze, former leader of the Night Owls, and a Mandalorian who no longer believed in the songs the armorer sang. Bo-Katan read the words on the wall like an old tour guide. She had no idea the plaque was about to be proven true. The plaque beside the living waters told the founding story of the planet. The mines dated back to the age of the first Mandalore. According to ancient folklore, they had once been a Mythosaur lair. Mandalore the Great was said to have tamed the mythical beast, and from those legends, the skull signet was adopted as the symbol of the people. Bo-Katan read it aloud in a flat voice, the cadence of someone reciting a childhood field trip. Then, Din stepped into the water. The ritual was simple. He recited the creed and let himself sink below the surface in full armor to mark the cleansing. He did not surface. For a moment, only one Mandalorian in the galaxy knew the Mythosaur was alive. Something below him pulled deeper. Bo-Katan dropped her own helmet, drew the darksaber, and dove. She found Din unconscious in the dark and began hauling him towards the surface. On the way up, in the shaft of light cut by the broken Mandalorian cave ceiling, the water below them stirred. A single yellow eye opened in the depths, vastly larger than a starfighter watching her. She did not stop, did not call out, and pulled Din up to break the surface and get him back to dry ground. When his eyes opened, he asked what had happened. She told him he had been pulled under by a creature. She did not tell him what kind. Bo-Katan surfaced and Din was alive, but she did not tell him what she saw, and the reason why became the most important storytelling choice in the entire show. Episodes later, the armorer summoned Bo-Katan to her forge, asked her to remove her helmet, and told her something no one in the room expected. She had walked in both worlds, the orthodox and the secular. She was the one who could unite the Mandalorian people. The armorer's reasoning was specific. She said that she had been taught the Mythosaur existed only in legends, and yet Bo-Katan had seen it. That sighting, she said, was a sign that the next age was upon them, and Mandalore must come together. Dave Filoni had a choice. He chose to keep the audience from seeing the Mythosaur rise. The executive producer, who developed a franchise alongside Jon Favreau and co-wrote The Mandalorian and Grogu, explained the decision in Disney Gallery, The Mandalorian. He described the encounter beneath the living waters as a moment of faith for Bo-Katan, not an action beat. She had to see something that should have been impossible, and she had to make a choice about whether to believe it. If the creature rose out of the water and revealed itself, Filoni argued, the moment became too obvious. This was what turned the Mythosaur from creature into question. Bo-Katan walked out of the water carrying a vision no one could verify, and the show asked her, and the audience, to decide whether to believe in it. In a quieter episode, The Foundling, Bo-Katan finally told the armorer what she saw. The armorer called it a vision rather than a confirmed beast, but she still inlaid the Mythosaur signet onto Bo-Katan's pauldron, beside the night owl emblem of her own clan. One sigil for the leader she had been, one for the leader, the prophecy now named. Bo-Katan saw the Mythosaur, and the armorer reframed the prophecy around her. But in the season finale, somebody else reached out to it, and the eye opened again. By the season finale, every piece was on the table. Mandalore had been retaken in a coordinated push by the Children of the Watch and Bo-Katan's clans, and the symbol that had ruled Mandalorian leadership for over 1,000 years was about to shatter in front of the audience. In the closing minutes of the finale, Moff Gideon and Din Djarin fought their last duel. The Imperial warlord who had led the purge from the ground crushed the Darksaber with his armored Dark Trooper gauntlet. The ancient blade, forged by Tare Vizsla, the first Mandalorian Jedi, broke apart in Din's hand. Moff Gideon destroyed the Darksaber. In the same episode, a different symbol of leadership opened its eye. For over 1,000 years, the Darksaber had been the answer to the question of who ruled Mandalore. The blade was won in combat, whoever held it led. It was a system built on conquest, and the armorer herself had named the cost of breaking that rule, warning that a Darksaber not won in battle would become a curse upon the nation. The blade shattered in a fistfight. The system shattered with it, and what replaced it was older than the blade by 1,000 years. The scene moved to the surface. Mandalorians from both factions stood beside the living waters as Din formally took Grogu as his apprentice. The naming ceremony was simple: Din Djarin and Din Grogu, master and apprentice by the creed. Then Grogu reached out. Grogu had already done this once on a Rancor with the same force ability. Now he was reaching for something city-sized. In the Book of Boba Fett, Grogu had used the force to calm a rampaging Rancor in the streets of Mos Espa. The technique was known in canon as taming beasts, also called beast control, a long-established force ability used to soothe or direct creatures. Grogu had reached out, touched the beast's mind, and put it to sleep. At the living waters, he reached out again. As Ben Lindbergh wrote in the Ringer's finale recap, Grogu touched the beast's mind and made it open its eyes. The Mythosaur stirred beneath the surface for the second time in 8 episodes. 3 different people now had 3 different relationships with the same creature. One bathed in its water, one saw its eye, and one reached into its mind. Din carried the creed, Bo-Katan carried the vision, and Grogu carried the force itself. None of them held the Darksaber. None of them had won a duel for the throne. And yet, between the 3 of them, they were the new face of Mandalorian leadership, a believer, a witness, and a force-touched child, all bound to a creature the armorer had once called extinct. The Darksaber chose its leader by conquest. The Mythosaur chose its leaders by who could see it, hear it, and reach for it. As the Mandalorian and Grogu film approaches release, Lucasfilm has carefully avoided revealing how deeply the Mythosaur fits into the story. The official synopsis framed the film around Din Djarin and Grogu working for the fledgling New Republic against Imperial warlords. Preview material confirmed settings on Hoth, a New Republic base, Nal Hutta, and a Hutt city. Mandalore was not on the list. Bo-Katan Kryze was not confirmed in the cast either. On the red carpet at the Saturn Awards, actress Katie Sackhoff told Temple of Geek she could not confirm or deny her appearance, only that audiences had not seen the last of her character. An IMAX preview earlier in the year showed the first half hour of the film, covering Hoth, the Hutt twins, and a gladiator scene featuring Rada the Hutt. No Mythosaur appeared. The serpent in the trailer was not a Mythosaur. Trailer coverage identified it by species. The marketing campaign had teased an underwater creature in a scene where Din faced the Hutt twins. Fan speculation immediately tagged it as an infant Mythosaur or a new sighting. Trailer breakdowns and creature databases identified the animal as a dragonsnake, a known canon predator from worlds like Dagobah and Nal Hutta, not a Mythosaur of any kind. What the film carries forward is not the creature, it is the structure the show built around the creature. Din walks into theaters as the man whose ritual bath stirred the beast. Grogu walks in as the Force user who touched its mind. Bo-Katan remains the only living witness to its eye, the leader the armorer named as the one who could unite Mandalore. Whether the Mythosaur appears on screen or not, the prophecy holds, the trinity holds, the legitimacy holds. The Mythosaur barely needs to appear in the film. Its work is already done. What started as a single line about a young foal on a desert world had grown, across 3 live-action shows, into the longest-running narrative thread in the Mandalorian saga. The Mythosaur skull that sat on Boba Fett's pauldron without a name, Kuiil named it. The armorer made it scripture, Bo-Katan saw the eye, and Grogu reached for the mind. By the time the darksaber shattered in Moff Gideon's grip, the choice of symbol had already been made. The old blade had to fall so that an older one could take its place. This was always the hidden argument of the show. Not that the Mythosaur survived, but that Mandalore had quietly stopped believing in conquest and started believing in something else. The darksaber chose leaders by who could fight for it. The Mythosaur chose leaders who could believe in it. The Mandalorians did not lose their warrior identity, they reframed it around something a sword could not contain. For the first time since Mandalore burned, its people were following something older than a throne. But the full story of how Mandalore fell, how its people walked the long road back from Glass, and how the Children of the Watch kept the old creed alive is its own road. The history of the Mandalorian people, from the first wars against the Jedi through the Night of 1,000 Tears, waits in one place, and the full timeline of the ancient Jedi Order they fought against waits in another. Watch them next.